There's an old Chinese proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Well, I wish that 20 years ago I'd learned these 3 habits, because it would have transformed the way I communicate with people on a much deeper level. So if you desire those deeper, more meaningful connections with people that I did 20 years ago and I didn't make the most of it at the time, then I think the habits we're going to go through could really have an impact on you. So let's dive in. The first habit is active listening, which effectively is listening attentively to someone without undivided attention. But quite often in conversation, we're not really that present. We're, what I like to say, is away with the fairies. I know I am, maybe you are as well, but it's an issue that we have, which means active listening is something that's really hard to do when we're so disengaged from the person we're talking to. I've experienced this before for sure, but actually quite often we're just worried about what the other person thinks about us, that social anxiety, that awkwardness, that uncertainty from being shy, or as I like to say, introverted quite a lot as well, that comes into play. So quite often that's the reason why we're not very good at active listening. As an example, and this is one reason I wish I had had this habit engaged into my behavior a lot earlier. I lived in India for 2 years and I was working with monkeys, as you do, at a monkey sanctuary, and I was helping with the rehabilitation, and through that I was communicating with the monkeys, because we don't teach them, they teach us. So the communication was there, but on the animal behavior level. And I was working with this English guy, and he came in as the welder. So he was fixing all the fences, all the pens for the monkeys. He was a real proper British, I'm a lad, you know, that kind of guy. Lovely. But we didn't have that much to talk about. So quite often of an evening, after we'd done all the work for the day, we'd sit on the balcony at night, listening to the crickets, listening to the monkeys talking to each other, and we would just talk. The problem was, I was quite unsure about what he thought of me, and often I would talk over him. And I remember this one night, he literally said to me, "Drew, you need to shut up." And I said, "Okay, Greg," I think his name was Greg. Okay, I mean, it really hit me. It really got to me, because I wasn't aware of what I was doing. But it turns out I was butting in over his conversation. I was talking over him because I was really nervous and unsure of how to add value to that conversation. And the only way at the time I thought I could do that was to just chime in and say something, even if it wasn't relevant to actually what he was saying. So that's an example of me not using active listening. And to overcome that, I've had to really work on being present with people. And it's a learning curve. Sometimes I'm on it, sometimes I'm not on it. But the key is listen. Actively be present in that moment, engage. And if I'd have done that back in India, I would have had a lot better connection with this guy, and we'd have been able to talk about a lot of different things, except the fact of me feeling nervous made him think I was rude, talking over the top. And that is the issue we have when we don't use active listening as part of our communication. So let me know in the comments below with a big fat yes if you've ever experienced this before, or even the complete opposite, where we end up actually not even listening at all to what the other person is saying. They come to the end of their part of the conversation, their input, and they'll ask a question, and you've no idea what they've said. I've done that too. Maybe you have, so let me know in the comments if that applies to you. The second habit is a big one. It's conversational threading. It's a huge one. Basically, it's the ability to create free-flowing conversation and with open and honest communication style. We do this by pulling out points of interest from existing conversation. And in the video above, I actually talked about this conversational threading in quite a lot more detail in that video. So check it out if you want to look into this further. And quite a big problem in communication that I found, maybe you found as well, is that we run out of things to say, and we have these awkward moments of silence where there's just nothing to fill that conversation with because we don't know where to lead it. This is where conversational threading comes in. Now, when I've run out of things to say in conversation, quite often, literally in the past, I've actually run out of the room. afterwards because it terrifies me. I've been terrible at communication, terrible at conversation sometimes, to the point where I've just made any excuse to get out of that environment, get out of that situation. And I know if I'd have learned this habit a lot sooner, then I'd have had the opportunity to create a lot more deeper connections with people I've met in the past. But because I haven't used this technique, this habit hasn't been instilled in me, I haven't actually been able to make the most of those opportunities, and they've passed me by. But not anymore, because conversational threading is now part of my vocabulary, my communication kit. So as a quick example, what we're trying to do by adding those points of interest from the conversation is to create threads where somebody can latch onto it and move that conversation in new directions. So let's give you an example of the quite popular question. So where do you live? Beautiful, love it. Okay, somebody asks me where I live. I can say, okay, I live in Sydney. Cool. I've told them I live in Sydney. Well, that's one thread. And in the video that I said to you about, we want to generate 3 threads, which means I need to give them more from that reply. So we try it again. Where do you live? I live in Sydney. I live right by the ocean, which I love because it gives me the opportunity to practice my free diving, which I've been getting into. And afterwards, I can have a coffee by the beach, watch sunrise if I've got up really early. It's awesome. So there it is. There's 3 threads there that I've given that somebody can latch onto about my enjoying free diving. I enjoy coffee. I like being by the ocean. So there's all these things about me in Sydney. Now, all of a sudden, we can have a really good conversation. But let's flip it. So we know how to use conversational threading to respond to somebody, but how do we use it to ask things of somebody? So the example would be if I'm asking somebody else, hey, where do you live? And they say, oh, I live in the UK near London. So they haven't really given me too much. They said they live in the UK near London. So I got 3 things I could kind of move on with there. So the first one is London. So I could say in response to that statement, oh, wow, I've always wanted to go to London. I hear the shows are great there. I really love the theatre. Are there any shows that you've seen that you'd recommend? So I've drawn the London in and moved it in a new direction where we can build that conversation. So something like that where we can bring our interest in that, but draw a question, a response that brings the conversation into a wider, deeper, more open and honest environment. And that, in a nutshell, is conversational threading. And again, if I'd have learned this 20 years ago, planted that seed, built those habits, conversational threading was part of my vocabulary, oh my God, I would have such better connections before. And those that I'm building now, it's proof of that because it's working. It really, really does work. So the first 2 habits really tie nicely in together. You've got the active listening and the conversational threading, because if you're listening intently to somebody, picking up on these little points of information, that can lead you in towards that conversational threading opportunity. So they tie in really well. Now, the third habit is communicating with empathy. Communicating with empathy is allowing deeper and more meaningful connections by just being instead of trying. And what I mean by that is that we often try too hard in conversation. I've done it for so long, is that we want to be the gurus. We want to be the advice givers, quite often because we care, but sometimes it's not the right time to give advice and we just need to zip it and listen. Be curious, ask the right questions, but don't try and provide all the answers. We're not Wikipedia. So that problem we face, and I faced a lot in the past, is that somebody would come to me with a concern, a worry, an issue. But what I wanted to do was provide the answer. And by doing that, what I ended up doing was talk to them, at them, not with them. And instead, I should have been asking these open-ended questions that allow that person who came to me because they just wanted to be heard in that moment. And if I ask some open questions such as, what's on your mind? What else? And the most powerful one, I hear you. If we can say to somebody, I hear you, without telling them anything for advice, it means that we're just allowing them to emotionally unload what they need to in a safe place. It's a really hard habit to bring into our vocabulary, but if we do, it's powerful And again, that ties into the active listening, because if we can start to learn how to listen without talking so much and actually being really present, then the empathetic communication can become really, really powerful and really, really meaningful to the person that needs it most. And that is what it's all about, creating those deeper, more meaningful connections because we care, right? And we want to communicate better for the better. So there it is. 3 communication habits that have definitely changed my life for the better. Yes, they're 20 years too late, but as they say, better late than never, and it's happening now. I really hope you get the chance to turn these habits into your habits and see the fruition of that, the improvement in your communication with those around you. And again, the deeper, more meaningful connections that are priceless. And there's another communication skill that ties in pretty well to what we talked about here. It's about removing the auditory clutter, those non-words and the filler words, the ums and the ahs. So there's a video right here. I highly recommend checking it out because it ties in really nicely to what we talked about here. So I'll see you in that video.